didn't worry about it. And when COVID quarantine happened, I started tying my own flies. That was something that immediately when quarantine happened, something I always wanted to learn how to do, but you never have the time. It's like it's like learning to play the piano. It's very much time, and it's gonna take a lot. So I order on Amazon, Jeff Bezos, thanks bud, ordered a bunch of fly tying crap and spent like, $500, but got the whole I got the
I saw the setup.
Yeah, it's pretty good now.
Super.
But I got the iPad there, and I'm like watching the videos, and I'm trying to follow along, and whatever. And I got pretty darn. I'd say I'm still definitely very novice, but I'm catching fish on my own flies now, which is exciting. But
wow.
Yeah, that was like a big moment for me when you like have the.
I would imagine in that realm.
Yeah, I got a buddy. He's teaching me to fly fish. He's kind of like, you'll never know what it's like though until you catch a fish on your own fly. And I was like, yeah. Like,
and this is an ex-guy from Montana.
Yes.
Like,
he's
in the shit.
The guy. Yeah. And I'm like, you're right. I'm buying all these fucking flies. Like, I gotta figure it out. And so, inevitably, it happened recently. Because of the quarantine, I got to fish a lot. So, I caught a lot of fish. I started realizing that it's a lot easier to tie flies that are matching with what you see in the river versus what you buy in the shop.
Wow. So
you nailed it.
I believe that was my question was, two, why is the benefit of tying your own flies, which you just answered.
Yeah.
But also with Edwin specifically, was he a good fly fisherman or just a good fly tyer?
Ooh, great question.
So far as I know, everything that they talk about is he didn't really fish. He was more of, because again,
he was kind of a famous fly.
He was,
as a teen, he was a prodigy fly tyer.
So for the listeners, Edwin Rist is a gentleman that he was born in, I think, like upstate New York, and he kind of grew. I think his parents were both journalists, and he kind of grew up in this like busy family home and everything. But his dad wrote an article on fly fishing, and he saw the article and read it at like 10 years old, and like instantly became obsessed. Apparently was like rummaging around the house basement, like looking for thread and line and anything he could find to tie to a hook. And so his dad kind of bought him the setup, and then his brother as well. So they both got into it, and he took Edwin to a fly tying symposium or whatever you call it, like a conference.
Yeah.
And he shows up, and there's all these guys huddled over their little vices and tying up stuff, and Edwin saw just like the extent of how much like bigger it really was.
Yeah.
And I think he fell in love with the artistry of it. And that's what I really, because Edwin ended up being a professional musician.
Right. He was a creative by trade.
Yeah.
He tied his ties, became a prodigy. And wasn't the whole motivation? I missed that part. Was it for a gold flute? Was that?
Yes. Yeah. He wanted a 24 karat gold flute. He was a flautist at.
This is a unique human being.
Yeah.
This is a very unique human being.
I think he went to Juilliard, or he went to some like really high level.
It was
music
a
academy.
yeah.
And then he got hired by the London Philharmonic or Symphony, whatever. And he was first chair flautist at 21 years old, living in London. Now, young man living in London, living up his, he's partying. Right. It sounds like he's just enjoying his life and everything, but he doesn't have enough money to buy this fucking flute. So he decides that he's gonna. This is after actually he'd already, one of his friends had told him, another fly tyer, was like, hey, you're in London, you should go up to the train museum. It's like a branch of the British Museum, but it's the natural history branch.
And just to interject real quick too, I think what's interesting is like a part of this whole like fly tying community, the thing was like there were these recipes that were like, how old were they? Like 200 years old, 250 years old, and they came from specific birds and feathers and things like that. And I think that's
who was the guy before Charles though?
Yeah, okay, so
what was his name?
Alfred Russel Wallace.
Okay, Alfred Russel Wallace.
He is the most famous person you've never fucking heard of.
Yes.
And it's so sad. Like you only hear about him in like your college anthropology class, and for a brief moment. And the reason the science shit on him is because he wasn't necessarily a scientist. He was a collector. But he just wanted to be a scientist so bad.
And he was putting pieces together and figuring it out.
Which is like a journalist mentality.
Well, he did.
He did figure it
Yeah,
out.
And so did Charles, but it was the kind of from my understanding, it was kind of like one of those final pieces that Charles was like, yes, boom,
Right.
thank you.
I'm going to run with it.
This is what it is.
So remember, Darwin came from a very religious background. So he was like, everything he's learning is totally against what he already knows, and what he knows and believes. So he's kind of like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, he's like panicking. So Darwin apparently wrote, the theory of natural selection through evolution, or evolution to the theory of natural selection. He wrote that, but didn't publish it. He kept it, and he actually had on the Beagle that he was on, he had it locked in a safe. And he wouldn't let anyone read it because he was too
scared. Didn't he have contemporaries that like knew and like kind of wanted him to?
Well, that's what this guy Wallace.
Yeah, right.
They were kind of friends. They'd known each other. Actually, Wallace really looked up to Darwin because he was a legitimate scientist who'd gone to college, scientifically proven papers and stuff like that. So Wallace actually tried. This is actually funny. He tried a couple times to go. He went to the Middle East. He wanted to go collect snake skins, and he got incredibly ill. And like had to go back to London to get like a medicine or whatever, and then he's like, he tried to collect and sell these things to museums, these skins or whatever you call them, and the museums were like, dude, like no, like we don't even know who you are, and he's like, okay, bummer, and what do I? And it was like, I think he tried like 3 different times,
amazing.
Traveling
Alfred,
in Africa,
Russel, Wallace,
and then he goes to Indonesia. And this is when he strikes in gold. He finds all these, and again, Southeast Asia, the most beautiful birds in the world. Everything's fucking vibrant and green and yellow and orange. And
untouched to a certain extent.
Yes, and so this is what Wallace does. He sends back, like 10 at a time. They call them bird skins. They just gut the bird, but it's like legs attached, heads attached, everything, eyes, and everything. He sends it back, and in London, the museum gets one and is like, this is cool. They keep one, and then instead they turn around and they sell them on the street to a bunch of people that make hats. What do they call the hat? Hat makers. Whatever.
Yeah,
There's a word for that.
During this time, women were wearing these hats that were almost full fucking birds.
Yes.
On their head.
Men. It was like part of like.
Well, the men would wear
that was the
Santa
Rolex.
fly.
That was a Rolex.
Yeah.
They would wear the fly that. It was like a fly that was tied specifically for
like
their
nuance.
exclusive fly fishing club.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it was very much like, you know how frat boys wear their like Alpha Sigma Epsilon thing. It's like that, but for a fly fish. It's like very much like that. So all things considered, the demand for these feathers just went right through the roof. Like immediately, overnight, suddenly people are like you know, they're out at the ball on Sunday night, and you know, like rich fancy woman's, you know, like leans on her husband and goes, well, how come she has a bigger hat than me?
Yep, right.
Next thing, he's like, well, tomorrow, baby, we'll take you out on downtown and we'll get you a new hat, you know?
Right.
So Wallace is down there collecting all these birds, and he's like, again, he's thinking he's fucking doing the right thing and like preserving history. And what he started realizing was right away, as he went from island to island, kind of like what happened to Darwin, as he notices he went from place to place, there were things, just tiny little changes. Yeah, so that's what he was like, wait, like why would this island's a little bigger, this bird got a little bigger, but it looks exactly like that bird, and it never got any bigger. And like, that's where he realized right away that evolution, you know, was natural selection, whatever, was a evolutionary movement, and he wrote it down, and he published it, and then he immediately sent it to Darwin, and Darwin got it and goes, you're nuts, you're screwed, you're so screwed, and like, was scared for him. Like, dude, you're gonna have the whole of the world after you.
You're gonna be in jail.
And he comes back from his. This is even crazier, actually. Apparently, he came up with that theory because he got a fit of malaria.
Right.
And Wallace was like huddled up in his little tent, and he's like sweating it out.
And this is how he thought about it.
Yeah, he just like it kind of in like a premonition or something. You can imagine, like you can almost say it's kind of crazy, but it's almost like the universe like landed on him at some point.
Right.
When he published that, his account of natural selection wasn't nearly as concrete or well built as Darwin's, and it actually convinced Darwin to publish his. So if you think about it, Wallace was the domino that knocked Darwin down to publish.
Right.
I like that.
So all back to the Tring Museum, both Darwin's species of birds, all of his samples, and Wallace's samples are all stored in one building. That's the Tring Museum. And
Edwin ends up
stealing all of
Wallace's birds.
But because nobody fucking cares about Wallace, still
they went and checked Darwin's,
and they're like, nothing's missing.
Probably my favorite thing about that story was this like little history nugget of just amazingness, which is again Wallace's second fiddle to Darwin.
This whole
month
poor
went
guy,
by.
like, you know,
This
like,
guy's still getting stepped on.
history still doesn't even help him out.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, that was the part that I think I appreciated the most of just like, I think he's not alone. There's a lot of people like that.
Well, there's another one that we'll talk about some other day, but I'll warn you. His name is Michael Faraday. Have you guys ever heard of Michael Faraday?
Sounds like
Einstein says he was the smartest person he's ever known.
Jesus.
Like Einstein. You know what I mean? Like Michael Faraday was the father of modern electronics. He invented the electronic motor. Yeah.
Looking at him right now.
And he was like a what do you call it?
Jamie, get on the.
Come on.
Yeah.
Born September 22nd, 1791.
Yeah. He
Famous
was
for.
Yeah, so he check it out. Michael Faraday went to school for 2 years and dropped out of school because back then, like, you get beat and he couldn't spell his own name.
Yeah.
So he was like, dude, I'm just getting beat.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Basically.
So Faraday really, he would sneak into these. There were these like scientists that were almost more like magicians. They would go in London. There was like this science theater you'd go to, and the scientists would come out and they'd give a big elaborate speech about how this is electricity, and they'd like turn it on and like Tesla. You know what I mean? Like Faraday's on the level of Tesla and Einstein, but nobody fucking knows who he is. And it's so funny that he only went to school for 2 years. He became an assistant for a scientist. So he was more like, I clean up the lab.
Right.
You know.
Doing the dirty work, but just to be around, just to be just
kind of, yeah, like be hiding in the corner and kind of see. They leave the experiment set up. He can go like really look at it.
Yeah.
So he apparently one of his, I can't remember who the scientist was, but the scientist was like, Faraday, you figure it out. Ha ha, we're going to the pub. And they like left him, and he went in there and he stared at it for like 3 hours. And then he called his little cousin up. He's like, I need to have somebody watch this. And what he did is he took a bunch of mercury and put it in a bowl, and then he ran an electric current through a stick, a metal rod, and it made the thing rotate because he realized that the electric current moved in the mercury, and it made it rotate. So
and you could visibly see it.
So he used electricity to create motion, which is like a huge boom overnight. Like, think about it.
Yeah.
Tesla. Like, you know, doesn't exist.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
like,
Literally the electric motor.
the light bulb, like everything we literally know in our lives, like comes from Faraday's. Like,
I'm reading this right now. Albert Einstein kept a picture of Faraday in his study wall alongside pictures of Isaac Newton and James Clerk Maxwell, which I
that's what he worked for, James Clerk Maxwell.
Yeah, that is
again another person lost to history. But
to the same,
one of the most
marginalized by history.
That's where when you start peeling some of these things back, which is why I love it.
Me too.
Again,
to finish the whole Edwin Rest thing, he never got in trouble. Nothing ever happened to him. He somehow pled down.
Asperger's.
Yeah, it was like the most unbelievable thing in the world, and all the history.
That's a bad thing.
All the feathers and everything were lost to fucking the gross ass fly fishing community that decided that they were gonna part it out and sell it without nobody knowing, and anyone that went looking for him was basically gonna get buried into some fucking podunk. Like,
do you think you would even know if you, let's say you found one of these feathers?
No.
You wouldn't even know.
No, because nowadays all those feathers that they make are all like chicken feathers that they stain.
Synthetic.
Yeah. Or no, they're still real feathers, but they're
real, but
they change the color.
Right.
Manufactured, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So back then, like the natural feathers, and that's what the biggest draw was.
I think that's what kind of motivated Edwin too, because he knew. I feel like he was a perfectionist. And he knew that he was just getting chicken feathers that were dyed a certain way or whatever. He wanted the real thing. He wanted to complete the real recipes because he was the best of the best.
Yes.
So he wanted to mount
That's
Everest there.
Like what you're saying, like there was a point where he says that when he like had all the feathers on the bed, he like kind of spread it all out. He's like,
and he
looked at it. And he's
can you
like,
imagine?
Nobody can touch me.
Can you imagine?
I am
the fuck out.
I am the guy.
Like, he had such an
The
embarrassment.
Walter White effect.
That was what was crazy.
But and this is the funny thing of tying fucking flies, of taking thread and tying it to a metal hook. Like
what?
Yeah, that's the part that I struggled with. Was like, man, it's for why?
Well, yeah,
it's for why.
It really is. It really is. It's the most humbling, most outrageous fucking story. Because you're like, and this happened in our lifetimes. I think the break-in was in like 2011.
Yeah.
Right? It was not long ago.
No.
And so you're like, this 21-year-old dude is now almost 27, you know,
walking the streets
with his golden flute. Like, you know, like.
And it ties into the theory of evolution, which is
really so many more
really
characters.
the heart of it.
Driving,
You know,
I'll tell you right now,
wow, you know.
The investigative journalist that went to go find all this was also a fucking great story.
Yeah.
Of how he just got kind of hooked and couldn't give up anymore. Like us, was willing to spend his life fortune to like.
He was one of us.
Yeah. To go like search out and find these feathers. He became so addicted to the feathers that he was like. And he's right. Like they are natural. Like that's natural history. That's our past. That belongs to the world. It belongs to all humanity. And Edwin simply took it all for a golden flute and parted it out like a bad car in order to, and it's for a community.
But kind of brilliantly too, because they never really could lay anything on.
Couldn't, yeah.
They had that one guy that was his friend in Japan
and in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Right, playing dumb or acting dumb or
exactly.
Or was dumb.
I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see no feathers. And they're like, there's like feathers all over your desk right here. He's like,
I love when they were like, if we had just looked at the log or eBay, we would have found out in 30 minutes.
If anybody paid attention at all to this whole thing.
That's what you're so right.
So incredible.
And I think that's what like the poor journalist, he wrote a book. It's actually a phenomenal book. It's called The Feather Thief.
You've read the book?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so great.
I love it.
Yeah, and he does a great job of like really painting the picture of Wallace and like, you know, bringing all the characters in. But the best part is like after listening to the podcast, I know the guy writing the book is a character. It's like one of those like what's the movie adaptation kind of concepts where you're like the writer is actually part of the whole story. Like, you know, like so it is cool to know like when you're hearing or reading this, you're like, wow, this guy's also the dude that like spent so much time and energy trying as hard as he can to. He really cares. You can tell he cares about the feathers, and it's ironic because you're like, dude, they're gone now. Like who really cares? I'm sorry, but like yeah, it's a bummer. They're gone. The fly fishing community has them, but man, I guess I can kind of see where you're coming from with your passion project of return the feathers. He apparently
he got upset about it.
Yeah, he went on some like fly fishing forums or whatever and said like, look, this is gonna be my last post. I'm asking you please, like, if anyone has any information on the treen feathers, on the Wallace feathers, like, please, like, it is a really great thing. It's a humble thing for you to send them back.
It's the right thing to do.
Right thing to do. And then he got banned from all those.
This is a part of history.
And this is what I learned. The fly fishing community is savage.
Can you imagine? Like,
and Bob, you're a part of it. What do you say?
Yeah, right. Like,
what do you speak for these men and women?
I definitely was very confused initially, and then I laughed it off a lot, and then it became the horror of realization of like, this really happened.
You getting up here? Is this what's happening?
People let this happen, you know. Like what they say, like if you're saying if they only checked the logbook because he signed in with his own name.
Yeah.
His eBay account was like Feather Heist fucking
exactly.
Or something.
Fly fisherman. Feathers.
Something so obvious.
Yeah, no, that part I appreciated, but
definitely worth.
Thank you for sending that our way because it did.
I knew two people were like, because I got a couple friends in like T4 and you know good friends that were like. I was like, you gotta hear this patch, I told him. And he and Allie apparently like listened to it while they were going fishing. Yeah. And he's like getting to the river and he pulls up and I'm already there and he's like, what the fuck? And he's like, dude, what did I just listen to? And I was like, dude, you're only an hour in, you got another half hour.
Just wait.
Like, just wait.
Like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
We could also.
Can I try a sign off real quick?
Yes.
You guys down with this?
Oh yes.
Okay. For Bob Tender, steady mobbing. For Cameron Rodriguez, no Z's, just work. This is Brando, and I have spoken.
Cheers. Till next time.
Yeah.